has been definitely a time of reflection, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Reflecting on the life that you've created, the job that you have, the partner that you're with, even how you've decorated your home. Am I okay with this? Does this sit well with me now that you're in that space and you can't leave?
Right.
Like you used to come and go, or you were able to just ignore it, that mess, wherever that mess was in your life.
That was Kareth Foster, who inspires others through speaking, writing, and comedy. I'm your host, Martin John, the Recovery Mentor, and I want to welcome you to the Recover Yourself podcast, where we address topics you'll face while on a journey to recovering yourself. This podcast is all about expanding the definition and scope of how we understand both addiction and recovery. I'm interested in doing this so everyone has an opportunity to recover themselves. This way, no matter where you are on that journey, there is a place for you here. Now, I was introduced to Kareth and her work through a book, The Coddling of the American Mind, in which there was a brief story that she was featured in. Our conversation started as a focus on what I call the double down effect, which we've all experienced and is when we double down on anything to prove a point to ourselves or others. It's never a healthy thing, but I think most of us can see areas we have and may still double down. It often happens when we or our identities are challenged. As Kareth and I discuss, the focus of our conversation moves firmly to identity. While listening to this episode, take note of how we discuss identity and how we encourage more fluidity in our lives rather than holding fast to our identities. Kareth has had to look her identity in the eye her entire life because of other people's ideas of what she should be doing or what she should be sounding like. What that has led her to see is that we can't dictate how others think or feel, and we can't expect others to take what we think or feel into consideration. This is a huge part of recovering ourselves, because when we're tied up in an idea of how others are supposed to be, then we are entangled in a losing battle. Also, our demanding of others might very well cause them to double down on that which we are trying to rally against. This further solidifies this aspect of their identity, rather than giving them the freedom to step away from it. Now, this is a very difficult and layered conversation, so please proceed with an open mind and know that we, both Kareth and I, are both here in acceptance of you and your neighbor. Kareth, thank you so much. Oh, man.
Well, I appreciate you having me. I think I said when we spoke, there aren't any accidents. You were supposed to read that book. You were supposed to see the passage that I was in and the experience that I shared. And I think that connection was genuine and authentic, and one that, led us to this place so we could further the conversation. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, authenticity is such a big deal. And the double down effect not only can get us stuck out in the streets if we have this idea of who we are, this identity that we're holding on to, but also how we get stuck in our lives when we get so easily distracted by our identities being kind of needing to change our identities or needing to reevaluate the identity that we associate with. So yeah.
I think that's a brilliant analogy, because what you're saying right now, well, it was applicable to, initially what you were talking about as far as substance and dependency on those things. I think that at a much broader spectrum, as you're saying, we as a country, as a society, as human beings are stuck in certain ways of thinking that keep us from experiencing our best lives. And that's what's happening right now in the name of this political divide and racism and sexism and all of these things that have people choosing a side or sticking their head in the sand. That's preventing growth.
Absolutely. Oh, good. Yeah. Like I did an interview with someone a while ago. It's just like, don't identify with something. I mean, we were talking about a trans man that I know, and the idea was like, pick your gender however you feel comfortable, but don't identify with any of it, right? Because as soon as you identify with it, you have to do certain things that other people are expressing.
I agree. My argument is that I don't have a problem with any pronoun that you choose. Like, that's fine. But if you're going to be wrapped up in just that, then you're doing yourself a grave disservice. Because you're going to be thrown off by anybody who doesn't understand it or get it or identifies or understands that identification, and you're just setting yourself up to feel further isolated from the rest of the world.
And this is happening, as you mentioned, politically, right? Like when you identify so strongly with a specific political outcome, it's so easy for you to get thrown off of your course, right? Like this is your course, this is your life, and we're so easily getting thrown off and spending months wrapped up in like things that, yes, of course they matter. I don't want to be like they don't matter, but like it is a very slippery slope once you start to identify with things.
Right. And I get what you're saying. I call them surface things, right? I mean, they matter. Okay. I'm not saying don't be passionate about your politics or
Absolutely.
your ethnicity or your religion or, but I was going to say this for later, but might as well jump into it now. I was in New York City for 9/11. And for me, like the rest of the world, everybody was in shock. That Tuesday lasted a long time. And then Wednesday, everybody just kind of holed up in their apartments and stayed home. And then that Thursday, I found myself out of my apartment with several friends at the Jacob Javits Center on 11th and 34th Street. And it wasn't just us, it was thousands upon thousands of New Yorkers with, tools and sandwiches and water and first aid. Like everybody was just there to help. And it gets me emotional because it was probably one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen in my entire life. Because at that exact moment, and for about 2 weeks after, in New York City, there was no race, there was no age, there was no gender, there was no religion, there was no politics. Like it was human beings there and their most authentic selves to help other human beings. And, we see it again in spurts, right? When we have a tornado, right, that hits someplace, or the hurricanes in Houston. My daughter's godparents had to be rescued by canoe from their house. And I assure you, the people who were helping them up weren't asking who you voted for or who do you sleep with.
Yeah.
That's not what this is about. And the work that I do embodies having that consciousness as much as we can. We're not perfect. We're not going to be perfect and always, eradicate bias and the fact that we stereotype. Like that's just part of human nature, right? But the idea is how do you create a space where that isn't taking up as much room, and you can like kind of climb that hurdle a little bit quicker, so that you see the other person as a human being and get to know them and experience them, because jerks come in all sizes and shapes and shades, and so do really good people.
That's right. And when we address this doubling down, right? Doubling down on like I identify as I don't know, just as like we're gonna go to a grand extreme, right? I identify as a white supremacist or whatever, right? Like someone who's like extreme on the far end. At a moment in time when there is national trauma like the like 9/11, that can take a back seat. Our identity can take a back seat, and yet that won't take a back seat when it's like a Wednesday, right? Like just like a day, like we're going to act the way our identities, the way we identify. So much more. We're gonna act in a way that is more externally in line rather than internally in line.
I love that you say it that way, because I'm somebody who's always struggled with my identity until I came into adulthood, I'll say, because I'm a Black woman, grew up in a really white suburb, educated parents. I'm fourth generation on both sides to go to college, which is unheard of for an American family, forget Black family, right? And I was just raised a certain way, and I didn't fit the quote unquote stereotype of a Black woman in America that we typically see in media and in TV. And in fact, the stereotype that a lot of people bought in to, including Black people, thanks to some of the movies from like the night, Boys in the Hood and all that stuff, like, oh, well, you're not really Black because you don't sound Black. And people bought it, right? Like they bought it hook, line, and sinker. And that may not have been my experience, that same lifestyle, right? but that doesn't make me any less Black. And so I had to really have a bit of a come to Jesus meeting with myself. I mean, it was a struggle having, my identity, what I thought I was versus what people were telling me I was versus what I wanted to be. And what I had to realize was I just had to be Karif. And yes, I'm Black. Yes, I'm a woman. And those things are my bonuses. And I was very, very fortunate. I mean, I've led a very charmed life. I have an incredible foundation in my parents. I went to a women's college that really just imparted this idea of, yeah, you're a woman, but so what? That doesn't mean you're limited by anything. You can still, so I don't say never, but very, very rarely have I in my adulthood gone into a situation thinking I'm going to be treated differently because I'm Black and I'm a woman. Now, have I been? Of course, I'm sure I have, but that's not the attitude that I go in with. And you know what the result has been? Like amazing success and acceptance. And the way, I thoroughly believe that the way we treat ourselves is the way it's the lesson for other people on how to treat us. We tell other people how to treat us. So if we go in with this identity strapped to our back that we are clutching onto with dear life, and other people don't recognize that, then again, that's a great way to get thrown off your game. And it's a great way to be trapped.
Can you speak a little bit about this idea of being trapped? Like being trapped by like what you're telling yourself you need to be and what is in front of you, and how can we kind of move some of those bows out of the way so we can sort of see clearly?
Sure. Well, everybody has an archetype, right? And we have multiple, really. And every great story has been based on various archetypes, the hero's journey, right? Which everybody really is in their own book, in their own life. But it's like, what part are you playing in that story? What's your archetype? And I just did an exercise recently. I have an amazing friend, Christy Turley, who, with her business partner, Martina Muir, started something called the Intuition Gym. And it was, how have your archetypes, what were you basically raised to believe you were versus who are you really? And how did that archetype that you were raised to believe, right, write your script? And what I realized, I really went in and I just did this the other day. And, I was raised to be the good girl, right? I was raised to be the rule follower. I was raised to be, someone who really just looked out for other people. And none of those things are bad things, right? But because that was the story that I wrote about myself, I didn't take as many chances and I didn't step out to do some things. I mean, I certainly have since like taken risks that a lot of people wouldn't. I mean, doing stand-up comedy as a career, moving to New York City with nobody, no support. But the idea is that we all grow up with this, this idea of who we are, whether it is positive or, oh, well, I'm the youngest, so I'm always going to be the baby in any situation. I'm weak because I had illnesses growing up, or I'm weak because I have dependencies on something. Like those are the stories that we use to write our script, and we will live by that until we recognize what our true archetype is, and that is actually something that's not limited. It's limitless.
Right.
And unless you are shown that or given an exercise, or I mean, I think very few people, like it has to be even less than 1%, come to it on their own. Everybody, I hate the idea of like when Kylie Jenner was on the cover of Forbes as like the youngest self-made billionaire. I'm like, there's nothing self-made about her. And this makes other people feel bad because they're like, well, I haven't done anything like that. Bullshit. She didn't do anything without the help of a team of people. Yeah, sure, she's the face of it, but every single one of us needs someone to be a mentor or a coach or someone to just plant the seed to help us, reap that and tend that garden so that we get to that place of limitless ideas and possibilities and thinking. And if you're not there, you shouldn't feel bad. That's not just on you.
When we identify with being a thing, when we have that story that we're being told we are, even if it's coming from us, there's often a lot of resistance because it's scary to go away from it, to kind of tend to do something else. And we have a whole list of reasons why it's okay. like you utilize comedy and a soft approach to kind of get people to kind of come to this. How have you seen people address these stories?
Sure. Well, I think I go back to I don't know how old you are, but you remember, I think it was Captain America, and it was like, knowing is half the battle, that
Oh yeah,
cartoon,
I'm 45.
right?
That's
Right?
my jam. We're good.
No, I
That
just
was I
remember
think
that
that
from a
was
little
I think
kid.
that was I think that was GI Joe, right?
Was
Knowing
it
is half the
G.I.
battle.
Joe? It was
Yeah.
somebody like that. It was one of those old school
Yeah.
cartoons, right? And knowing is half the battle. And I think, you can't address it unless you recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the first step is being like, okay, wait a second. There's something that is missing in my life, or there's something that I'm not fully doing to give me the results I want. Where am I stuck? And that takes holding up the mirror, and looking at yourself, which is not what a lot of people want to do. Although we've kind of been forced to do that this past year, 2020 has been definitely a time of reflection, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Reflecting on the life that you've created, the job that you have, the partner that you're with, even how you've decorated your home. Am I okay with this? Does this sit well with me now that you're in that space and you can't leave?
Right.
Like you used to come and go, or you were able to just ignore it, that mess, wherever that mess was in your life, the relationship, in the physical presence. And so now you have to deal with it. And I think that the first part of dealing with it, and I really address this a lot in my book, You Can Be Perfect or You Can Be Happy, is not to beat yourself up. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself like you would be kind to a friend that you love. We are so much more willing to give grace and leeway to others. And yet, when it comes to us, we are our own worst critics. And we will beat ourselves up to no end. And I mean, there are multiple reasons why you should be kind to yourself. But, the first is, if you're not taking care of yourself, how can you take care of anything or anyone else?
Right.
The analogy I use is I used to fly all the time for work, and I would fly a lot with my children and my husband. And, usually the girls would sit with me. So there's only like 3 in a row. And the flight attendant would always come by and say, she'd see them sitting there and say, listen, ma'am, if anything happens with the cabin pressure, the oxygen mask falls, put your mask on first, and then pick your favorite kid and put their mask on. Okay. But she would, if they were funny, they would say that. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, my kids are my life. Why wouldn't I put their mask on first? But then, of course, like, it made sense. Like, how, if I don't put my mask on first and I become incapacitated, how can I help them? I can't. So it's not selfish to take care of yourself. That's called just self-care. And that's part of recognizing, again, what's creating your story, going inside and looking and not beating yourself up for it, but recognizing it and then saying, you know what, this is something I need to tackle. And if it's something you think you can tackle on your own, great. If it's something you need mentorship on, or, I mean, we are in the day of an age of information. Like, we can get it from anywhere. We can hop online, we can get a book. There are a bajillion and one coaches out there, finding the right person for you, or the right thing to help you. Even just meditating and praying. Like, it's amazing how your higher self, when you connect to it, will give you the answers. You just have to be open to hearing them.
So what you were just talking about is great, because it brings me into the next point of, like, most of us don't want to even admit that we are wrong.
We don't want to ask for help. We don't want to ask for help. We don't want to appear weak. And sometimes that's a cultural thing. I was just reading this horrible article. It was saying that in Japan, in October of 2020, excuse me, they had the highest suicide rate. They had more suicides than they had deaths from COVID. And part of it is they have a culture where it's not okay to ask for help. There's a college student who started a helpline, a 24-hour helpline, that said almost every person who calls in starts a sentence with, I know it's not okay to ask for help, but I need this, this, and this because I'm feeling this way.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is sometimes it is a cultural thing, right? And it kind of is for us too. I mean, here
It's
it's
all
more acceptable to go to therapy, though. It's definitely more acceptable to be in therapy. I mean, in New York City, listen, it was a prerequisite. But this idea that if I ask for help, I'm admitting that I don't have it all together. Oh my God. Guess who has it all together? Absolutely no one.
absolutely.
Newsflash. But we don't think that because we are so caught up in social media, right? And what we see on TV and how celebrities' lives have been sold to us. I mean, I'm even on like these homeschooling groups, and some of their pictures they post up are these perfect, like little settings with the alphabets up on the thing. And, my dining room table looks like a tornado hit it. And
Right.
that's where my kids are most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, we have our moments, and of course I will post those too. But the reality is, people think the grass is greener. It's not. I mean, my favorite saying is the grass is greener when you water your own lawn, not on the
Love
other
that.
side.
Yeah. Love that.
And again, that goes back to taking care of yourself.
And this leads into this conversation of doubling down because so many people, they're going to post those perfect pictures. And that is a doubling down. That is just like building a facade around a story that maybe you don't even believe or don't even want to believe, but you're coaxed into believing it. And so you constantly you're chasing this thing that you can't catch. It's like the old Buddhist saying of hungry ghosts.
Right. And perfection. I mean, that's literally why I wrote the book. You can be perfect or you can be happy. It sounds like it's a choice, but it's not because perfection doesn't exist. So why not choose happy? And now that's a journey. And there's a caveat, happiness is not a constant, and that's okay too. I literally posted a photo on, I think actually in this blazer, last week of me looking gorgeous, like, glammed up because I know how to do my makeup. I know how to do my hair. I had natural lighting, but I'd spent most of that day in bed because I just needed to rest. I wasn't feeling it. Now, I haven't spent the last 3 weeks in bed, like, that would be a problem and I should get help. But there are days when you just need to just check out for a little
Absolutely.
bit. And I posted that picture with the message saying, look, I know what this looks like, but just know behind the scenes, this is what was really going on. So I want you to remember that when you see someone's glam shot or their pretty vacation pic or not everybody is living their best life all the time. And to think that they are is such a disservice to you and your spirit. It's that carrot, that golden carrot on that cart that you'll never catch. If by chance you catch it, next thing you see is a bigger carrot coming down the street. And you're like, oh, I got to get that one. So
That's
you're
right.
on this constant like chase for something that, and you're destroying yourself in the process.
I made a
You're
post. I made a post not long ago. It was like, don't let your definition of the word perfection rob you of yours.
There you go. That's beautiful.
Our idea of what perfection is doesn't diminish our perfection.
Right. I mean, the fact that we exist, and not to go into a
No,
biology
please.
class,
Yeah.
but anybody who's ever tried to get pregnant, and I mean tried, like, okay, we got to set our clocks and, my temperature is at this level and, okay, you got to, this is our window. They know that the odds are like, I mean, it's like you got a 20% chance anyway. But for that one sperm out of the millions and millions to find that egg to make you, like that is nothing short of a miracle. So the fact that you exist means that you have purpose. A lot of people feel very disconnected. People feel like, they don't have purpose. And you may not have it fully identified, but you do have purpose. Just your mere existence is proof of that. And that's what I want people to take away from this conversation and from any of the conversations that I have, and the idea that you're not perfect because of, a physical element or aspect, your size, or something that you don't think is perfect on you, your coloring, your hair,
addiction,
whatever it is.
your
Yeah.
past.
Yeah, exactly. We aren't again, it goes back to identity. You aren't what happened to you and you aren't what you did. And that's really big. And I think for that to really resonate with people, like that's such a deep statement that I'm going to say it again. You aren't your past. You aren't what someone else has done to you, and you aren't what you have done. You're a creator in your life. And every day you get to make the choice to create something new and be something new and be in that spirit of your most true archetype.
And if we don't get the opportunity to question, hey, where am I wrong today? Then we won't get then eventually we might double down. We might double down in staying who we are today. Because tomorrow we're not going to be who we are today. And that's a journey that's going to continue for the rest of our lives. And when we identify as anything, it's just selling us short.
That's exactly right. You're robbing yourself. You're robbing yourself. And I get why people want to identify something, because there's nothing stronger. I'm sure it's somewhere on the Pavlov scale. I don't have it in front of me, but to belong, right? Who doesn't want to belong? But think about all the people who like have joined gangs, right? Those are all people who, when you get to talk to them, felt like dejected and rejected, and they didn't have a sense of family or connection. And that was the group that took them in and made them feel like they belonged. And that's how they got into that life mostly. Yeah, there are some people who are just not good people, have really messed up energy, but I don't believe that's the majority of people. I think most people just want to belong. And unfortunately, they were susceptible to a group that didn't have good intentions. And that's how they got kind of pulled into that. But every single one of us, that's where it's part of our natural needs. And so to identify, well, I'm a Republican and I'm a Democrat and this is my people and and I belong, it gives you that sense of you're not out there by yourself.
Safety in numbers.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. You can feel
and it's why
safe.
It's hard for people to speak up and say, well, I don't agree with that. That's not right. Because they don't want to not belong anymore. And unfortunately, we are in a day and age where, this cancel culture, right? This idea of, well, you don't agree with me. You don't think the way I think. So we don't belong together. So you don't, just can't even be part of this conversation. You can't speak on my campus. You can't, be part of this organization. You can't teach at my school because you're saying something that doesn't jive with what I feel makes me part of something and connects me to other things. Like, when did that happen? Like,
I mean, there are dates, but we're not going to go into
But it's like, it feels like it kind of just suddenly, like slowly, and now we're like in it. And I hope to goodness that it's, as George Carlin said, this pendulum that will swing back. But I don't know how far it's going to go, because right now it's very disheartening for me as a comedian, as someone who's an advocate for free speech. And, while I don't like everything that everybody says who exercises their free speech, I don't have to like everything that they say to support it. That's not my job to be the jury. It's my job to say, you know what, we all have that right. And hopefully we counter that bad free speech with more good, positive free speech.
And that, once again, we talk about this doubling down. Well, I'm gonna do more work to stop people from speaking, right? Than I will to get the people that I want to speak and the voices that I want heard. And so we're doubling down on the negative. We're doubling down on, your conversation doesn't make me feel comfortable, so we're going to protest the fact that you have the right to speak. Yeah.
And there gets to be a bit of a mob mentality around it. But there's also something to, and I can't put my finger on it, and I don't even know if I'm saying it the right way, but there's just something to negativity. There's an energy to it that's vacuous. And it's, if you're not careful, it will suck you in. Like there's something very attractive about it in a bad way.
So that's addiction. It's giving us a dopamine hit because we're accepted, because we have attention, because whatever. I mean, we all get dopamine in many, many different ways. And so like when we're with the cool kids, we could look at the cool kids from the outside and be like, I want to be a part of that. Then when I'm a part of it, I get my little dopamine hit. And then that's not enough. And so I got to take it that next step further in order to continue getting my dopamine. We look at, the name that's coming to mind is like Kyle Rittenhouse, who, he wants to be a part of militias. He wants to be a part of and then he can go and kill people. And then he gets supported by famous people. And then the dopamine that he's receiving is proving to him that he should double down on this attitude.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's, yeah. I mean, we're in such an interesting time right now where you see it from both sides. I mean, truly, you see people who are, there's no like, well, it's just that side doing it. Like you see it all around. And that's why it's so unnerving because it's so pervasive. It's just very unfortunate that we've been forced to have to pick a side.
Right.
You know, the way our system has been set up and the way that even the news networks are now, you know, you're either on this side or on that side. And, you know, there's no in between. And it's not news anymore. It's all sensationalism and getting people riled up. You know, we don't have cable in our house. We have internet, but no cable or, you know, but I did have to get on an airplane in October for an event, and I watched the television that was on the screens on the plane, and I was flipping between CNN and Fox and MSNBC, and by the time I got it was like a 2.5 hour, 3 hour ride, I was physically drained.
Yeah.
I felt like life had been sucked out of my soul. And I think about like the people who are stationed in front of their television sets 24/7 watching this stuff. Like, what is it doing to these people and their energy and their ability to function, you know, as these incredible soulful human beings that we are. And we're supposed to be connected to source, not to just what's being, you know, the messaging that we're being given.
Yeah. And it's putting them in a position where they're in this constant flow of reasserting their identity because they are Fox watchers or they watch CNN or they have the right answer. And as they interact with things that they like and that they have become addicted to, they believe falsely that their identity is right. Hence, we end up doubling down on these ideas that we don't really deep down believe, but we believe in this space of our addiction, and we believe in this space of our, you know, our the trusty dopamine messaging that we continue to have. And you essentially overdosed on that sort of interaction while you were on the plane, and you came off and you're like, I'm ill. That's an OD. Like that's absolute overdose.
No, without question. Without question. I think so few people. I really love the way, Martin John, that you are phrasing this, because it is about addiction in the sense of this high that we get and the lows that come after. So you need to get another hit of it, so you keep watching, right? Or you keep engaging, or you get in that war on Twitter or on Facebook, and you know what I mean, to keep that adrenaline going and that dopamine and the, you know, everything else. But how does it leave you afterwards? It's got to leave you deflated.
You know, when I talk about addiction, I want to make sure that we broaden that language, because when we identify with being something, that identity in any way, it can lead us to, as we mentioned earlier, it takes away from us. Adding an identity doesn't open anything for us. It actually takes from us. It takes all of the rest, everything that's not part of that identity. You know,
and that is my so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but no, that's my issue with the whole, like, you know, I identify as, like, all of the new letters and the pronouns that are coming out, and the, you know, well, I'm you know, I'm Afro-Cuban American. I mean, listen, I'm not saying don't, like, if that's who you are, that's who you are, but when you solely look to be labeled as that, like, it's just, what a disservice I think you're doing to yourself as a human being. And I know people may think that I'm being idealistic about, well, we're all human beings. Well, yeah, we are, but, and have we had different experiences because of our labels, because of our skin color? Of course we have. I'm not denying that at all. But I think that when that becomes the focus, we are detracting from what can connect us. I mean, I actually coined the term inversity because I feel that the word diversity, I mean, forget it right off the bat, diversity at the root of it has division and divide, right? But when we are having these diversity and inclusion programs and speakers come in and all these conversations around it, what you're still doing and what has been happening for decades is dividing people into these groups. Well, you're diverse because you're this. You're diverse because you're a woman. You're a person of color. You're part of the LGBT plus. You're differently abled. You practice this. You're not diverse because you're part of the status quo. You're a straight white guy. So, well, that's just so counterintuitive to me if we're really talking about bringing people together. Right. So that's why inversity is about, shifting the focus from what separates and divides us to what do we have in common? How can we be truly inclusive of one another? But most importantly, and the most critical part for me is how can we be introspective? Going back to looking inside, how do we understand your value, your worth, your connection to humanity? Because it's when you can see those things in yourself, that's when you can see them in someone else. So instead of working from the outside in, this is inside out work.
I see this need to identify with a label as being part of our social media addiction, because social media is something that is fast. And so it's real easy to say, I am ABC, whatever that is. But as we identify with I am, it's limiting us. And it forces us, when we want to stand up for something, it forces us to double down. And if we're doubling down, are we taking into consideration the bigger picture? Because our identity is what's causing that.
I think it just truly depends on that certain people's experiences. It's like, getting someone to understand. So my husband is white, he's Australian. And we got into a very intense discussion, some would call it an argument, about the terminology white privilege. So this came up in conversation when I was performing at a casino in upstate New York. And we were driving from Manhattan to this casino. My husband's like, let's take a scenic route. We've got our two little girls in their little car seats. And he's driving through these beautiful neighborhoods. I mean, lush green lawns. Everything is looking like a Norman Rockwell painting. And I started seeing Confederate flags on these lawns. I'm like, oh, that's like, we weren't that far out of New York City, like the most diverse place in the world. And I didn't say anything. I just kind of kept quiet. And then I performed and I did well. One of my really good friends ended up winning, this cute little Irish girl from Boston. And we're walking around together afterwards, and people would come up to her going, oh my God, you were so funny. That was great. And they wouldn't even look me in the eye. I didn't even get a conciliatory, and you were good too, which usually you get, like, and you were good too, even if they don't mean it. But I'm like, they weren't even, and she and I were both like, this is so weird. Why are people like talking to me or looking at me? And then the last straw was I was standing in line at this little bakery. I was going to take some treats up to my husband and the girls in the hotel room. And this guy in a get her done t-shirt just like cuts me off and goes in front of me. No excuse me, no nothing, like totally intentional. And I was like, what? Now, of course, the irony is Larry the Cable Guy is a very dear friend of mine. But I get upstairs to the room and I tell my husband, I go, dude, this is going to sound crazy. I go, but I think this place is kind of racist. To which my husband goes, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. I'm sorry, what? You forgot to tell your Black wife who's here with your half Black children that this place might, and it wasn't like I could do anything about it, right? But at least I would have had the emotional armor on.
Right.
You know what I mean? I would have known what I was dealing with. And I could have, I don't know what I would have done, but just having that knowledge, because again, I go into places thinking nothing about my color and my sexuality because like, that's just those are parts of who I am, not all of me.
Right.
So I go, dude, that right there is an example of white privilege. Well, that was like shooting off the firing gun. And we started going and around and around. I can't believe you accused me of having white privilege. I didn't ask to be born in this body. I didn't. And we're in, this fight continued through the car. Like we're driving 80 miles an hour. The last place you want to fight with your spouse, because nobody can leave. You
Absolutely.
can't
Yeah.
slam any doors.
Because you're a captive audience.
Right. And it was then that I realized that it did seem accusatory, right? He didn't ask to be born in his body. I didn't ask to be born in my body. I go, you know what? Let me rephrase that. I go, it's an advantage that you have. I go, dude, you are 6'4", you're attractive, you got blue eyes, and you have a penis. You won the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory golden ticket.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I go, and that is not your fault, but it does mean that you are going to be treated differently than I am. If we were to walk into a car dealership separately, I'm going to be treated differently than an elderly person or someone who speaks English as another language or someone who's openly gay. And just like I have to be an advocate for them, you have to be an advocate for me and for them. And so that's what this is. You have an advantage.
All of this, all lives matter and all that, that leads into our kind of, that's part of the doubling down. Like I'm going to be angry. I'm going to respond. I'm going to do these things because I identify as something and I don't want to look at like my privilege. I don't want to look at my advantage. I don't want to look at this or that. And if you force me to look at that, what you're doing is you're telling me I'm not good enough, because that's what I've been telling myself this whole time.
Well, and that's what's happening with the whole idea of, white fragility. Like, I think that is the counter movement for what should be happening. Like, nobody who's white asks to be born white. Like, it's not their fault. Mm-mm. You do need to recognize you have this privilege and advantage. But should you feel guilty and beat yourself up and hate being a white person? No, nobody should hate being a Black person or an Asian person. Like, everybody should love who they are, because again, you're this miracle. So it's these extremes that are really upsetting for me. Like, why do you have to go there? Why does it have to be like, I'm a horrible person because this is who I am? No, again, this identity, right? Mm-hmm. Is that all of who you are? No. It's not. It's part of it. And if you have this advantage, then just have an awareness about you and be this advocate for other people. Don't just live in shame and guilt and, not want to do anything. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And there are people who are peddling this and making a lot of money. And that makes me sad.
And that message is moving infinitely quicker than it ever did before.
And this is hard to think about, and this is hard to talk about, because you think, oh my God, what can I do? How can I make a difference? I'm one person. This is a lot of weight to have on my shoulders. But the good news is you're not just one person who's thinking about this. There are many of us who are thinking that. And it is, well, what can you do? Well, you can do small things at a time. You can really look at who you're voting for judges, for sheriffs, the small scale stuff that you don't think about. I think people are waking up a little bit to politics because of this past election in 2020, and realizing that their votes hopefully do matter. There's another aspect of looking at why, just like you said, why are our values being placed where they are? Is it for monetary reasons? Is it for power? Is it for, I think it's all of the above, D, all of the above. But it's the same with, why are we being driven apart, like as far as like in the diversity world of being told to choose these identities, having things kind of like thrust in our face, and children being, told like, you can identify as this and this before they're even adults and know who they are. Right. Like, there's so many factors that we need to kind of really analyze a little bit deeper, and be like, you know what, I'm not going to buy into that, because I see an inherent issue with this, because this is going to cause more problems down the line. Mm-hmm. And for me, just as this observer from the outside world, I see us being intentionally pit against one another, and for what purpose, I don't know. Who is behind it, behind the curtain, I don't know. But my whole message is, don't fall for it, people. Don't fall for this idea that we're more different than we are alike, because that's not true. That's a false narrative. And yet we're consumed by this idea and the identities, right, that we're clinging on to that make us feel better or safer. But the reality is it's just creating more chaos around us. And so again, it goes back to this awareness of that and not letting, the neighbor sign in the yard across the street tick you off. You don't know who they are. You don't know why they voted for that person per se. You probably waved and got along great before 2020 and you knew who they voted for.
Right.
Why are you going to let that stop you now?
That's right. I look at, and this is why my podcast is entitled Recover Yourself, because there is no right answer to how we as individuals are going to tackle this. But if you listen, and if you're quiet and you stop identifying as that which you were told to identify as, then you'll find the exact way to tackle all of this in the way that you can. Because, maybe that is voting. Maybe it is, volunteering somewhere. Maybe it is adopting a dog. However you are being driven and being inspired to make a difference, that's a lot better than however you're being forced to be angry to be who you are because the identity that you decided at some point in your life before today. That individual that you think you're supposed to be is taking us down this path of doubling down.
And anger will swallow you up whole.
The more angry you are, the more you're going to attract it, the more you're going to see it, the more you're going to engage in it, the more you're going to become addicted to it. And all addiction, it only ends with loneliness and death. Kareth, thank you so much. Oh man, we tackled so much today.
I felt very comfortable with you and hopefully was able to share some insights, and I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you, and I think that you are a brilliant mind, and I love what you have done with your life from your experience and the gift that you're giving to the world. I just think it's incredible.
Well, thank you so much. This was an amazing conversation to start from start to finish, and it was well over an hour. And so if you want access to the complete unedited conversation, support me on Patreon. You can find links to all that Kareth is doing in the description of this episode. She's the author of the book, You Can Be Perfect or You Can Be Happy, and she leads institutional inclusion programs called Inversity Solutions. It's very important for us, at the very least, to identify how our perceived identities are keeping us down or holding us back. Even the grandest identity is still less than you are. And if you can prove otherwise, ask yourself, are you doubling down? We get so comfortable defending our identities. We start to think they're saving us from something. There's no limit to what we can do as individuals. And when we're ready to shed our identities is when we can really embrace all that life has to offer us. Please support this show on Anchor.fm or support me and my work at Patreon, where you can get access to unedited content as well as writings and access to supporter group portrait sessions with me. You can also support me with a donation through Venmo at martinjohn_Garcia. I host workshops regularly, and although they're open to the public, I offer professional CEs through NADAC for those. I also take a limited number of one-on-one clients every month, so contact me when you're ready to work together. Thank you for listening to the Recover Yourself podcast, and until next time, keep recovering yourself.